Thank you for this introduction, ladies and gentlemen. I am here to introduce you to our project, the process of its preparations and its future. Our institution originated from a small department. Now this department of high-speed rail has 70 employees. Our aim is to prepare projects for high-speed rail projects. Let me start by saying or by explaining the purpose of preparing high-speed rails. We should start in a European context. In Europe, we have Trans-European Transport Network, TEN-T, based on a decision of the European Commission, and it comprises high-speed rail too. In the Czech Republic, we in the region of Central Europe should enable connection throughout or across Europe. Based on that decision of the European Commission, a major part of our high-speed rail network should be part of the core network or the advanced core network, meaning implementation until 2030 or 2040. We can take a closer look now. In the Central European region, we'd like to comply with international treaties. We'd like to fulfill our international obligations, meaning that we'd like to get from Berlin to Vienna in some 4 hours. From Prague to Brno, we'd like to travel for an hour. From Prague to Warsaw, 3 hours. From Prague to Berlin, 2 hours. Prague to Vienna, 2 hours. Prague is in the middle of the whole map. Nowadays, the journey takes much longer, or you can take a plane. Either you can travel for 8 hours or you can take that plane. If we discuss the benefits for the Czech Republic, we should say that the network should be available to 75% of population, and the concept of operation on high-speed rail should be like that. High-speed rail should not be used for very fast passenger transport only. They should also enhance interregional transport, such as when going from Prague to Havlíčkův Brod, you'll be able to use high-speed rail for half an hour and then conventional rail for half an hour, and your journey will be very fast. From Prague, you should be able to get to all regional cities in approximately 2 hours. Here you can see it on this map, how the journey times to Czech regions will reduce over time. We truly like the map which is on the bottom. This is how the Czech Republic looks like if we do not use geographical scale. This deformation, you can see that it is deformed because of journey times. Around Prague, we'll see a lot of gray color, and it's getting smaller and smaller, and Moravia gets closer to Prague, to the level of the Highlands region. In cooperation with the Ministry of Transport and for the purpose of preparing our future projects, we've prepared this plan of operation. We call it operational concept of fast high-speed rails. It's available at the internet. Some journalists have just noticed that it's there. Obviously, everyone wants their own train running from their doorstep to whenever they need it to go. But in reality, the implementation of high-speed rail means that most of trains will use or will run on high-speed rail. So high-speed rail will contribute to the speed of transport, meaning that the network will be used by 3/4 of the Czech population. There are about 4 layers of passenger lines. Fast or faster lines providing for interregional transport running 20, 30 kilometers per train per hour. That's the minimum. The minimum speed will be 200 kilometers per hour. Then there are trains that will stop in district towns. They can have the speed of 230, 250 kilometers per hour. Then there are express lines. Their speed can be 320 kilometers per hour. And there will be a public service obligation, meaning that this type of services could be ordered by regions. And then there are trains or lines that will provide for that very, very fast transport across Central Europe or within the Czech Republic, from Prague to Ostrava via Brno, perhaps even not stopping in Brno. These are clearly commercial, or based on a commercial aspect, and they might be given a time slot. They'd be running with a speed of 320 kilometers per hour. So let's have a look how far have we've gone when preparing high-speed rail in the Czech Republic. How does it look like? The strategic phase took place between 2014 and 2018. It's finished now, or it's completed now. We've got a program of high-speed rail network development. We prepared first studies, first policy, also we've set corridors for high-speed rails in maps. Following approval of the government and of the House of Deputies, in 2018 we started to prepare feasibility studies. Feasibility studies are used to assess the purpose of the project, its economic viability, its ability to transport sufficient number of people, whether it's viable in terms of development, etc. All such projects must be approved by the central authorities of the Czech Republic. Now the feasibility studies are used to update regional plans, zoning plans of regions, and we are setting very specific corridors where high-speed lines will be developed. This includes SEA, Strategic Environmental Assessment. It's something that requires involvement of the public, and the purpose is to assess the impact of a project on the environment. Gradually, we got to the next phase where we are supposed to prepare first project designs and area. Very soon there will be first projects finished, and what is ahead of us is the very development of projects. Here's yet another map of the Czech Republic. In green color, there are projects with feasibility studies. Most of them were very successful in terms of money-wise. As Mr. Havlíček mentioned, the line Prague-Wroclaw is being completed just now, and we are looking for economical suitable solution. One part may be a high-speed rail, and the other part can be just upgrade of an existing line.
Here you can see the current status of land use planning. Here in individual regions, you can see in what regions the corridors are prepared for developing high-speed lines, and in what regions the land use documentation is in the process of updating, and this is the responsibility of regional authorities. Here you can see the project preparation documentation for the land use decision for EIA. What is shown in red is well, we already have projects. It is more than 300. Orange is when we are looking for a designer, and for gray lines we plan to open tenders in 6 months. So soon we will have documentation for land use decision for the entire network. The four sets of documentation packs will be ready this year, and the first EIA processes have already been started. Now, these are just a few examples illustrating that we do not work or focus only on technical documentation, but we focus also on architectural design. We open tenders for architectural design of new stations that will be located outside of cities on the high-speed rail, although there will be connections between the stations and the nearby cities, but these stations will usually serve the entire region and will be located outside of the cities themselves. So this is, for instance, Prague East Terminal close to D11 motorway. Here we have already project documentation ready. This is the terminal in Ústí nad Labem, where the architectural study has been prepared, and it is well integrated into the landscape. One of the conditions was that it cannot be seen from the Říp mountain, for instance. And these are some maintenance stations that will be used to maintain the high-speed rail line to ensure that it stays operational and safe. This is just a list of types of basic technical parameters. We do not have time to focus on them in detail, but we can discuss it later if you are interested. Here, this picture shows that the high-speed rail will be no concrete giants, or these are classical, typical rail lines, and the only way how you can identify them as high-speed is that they are very straight and that they are fenced, which is not the case of standard lines. I would also like to mention how we have been financing and finance high-speed rail, and we will today discuss about the future options for financing. So 50% participation from CEF fund has been approved for Prague Drážďany, or state border section of the line, and for other arms we applied for contribution this year, but the final decision has not been made yet. And this is a slide showing the current status of financing HSR projects preparation. In 2020 it was 50 million, in 21 it was 167, in 2022 540 million, and for this year we have been allocated 1.25 billion Czech crowns, and we can expect this amount to grow also in the next years, because we will be adding archaeological surveys which usually take place on a quite large area. We will also need to purchase land in until 2026, and then we will start construction in 2027, and the financing of the construction phase is also the topic of today's event. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for your opening presentation on behalf of the Rail Administration. I would like to add that something concerning the preparation of preparation managed by the Rail Infrastructure Management or Rail Infrastructure Management Authorization. It is linked to the Act number 416. Yesterday it was discussed at the Chamber on Economic Effort here in the Chamber of Deputies, and we discussed 4 or 5 basic terms or new things that we want to introduce in this amendment to the Acts to make sure that the purchasing of land is transparent, that we make financial settlements with municipalities whose areas will be crossed by the railway lines. So we focus on these aspects in the proposal for the amendment to the Act, and we want to make sure that we get political support across the entire political spectrum. So I'm just informing you that we are working on amendment proposals to the new Act. We still have quite a lot of time available. We have time to submit our proposals until August 24th, and then it will be discussed in the Chamber of Parliament on 31st of August. Thank you for this opening speech, and I would like to ask the next speaker, the Deputy Chairman for Economic Affairs at the Rail Administration, Tomas Cocek. Tomas Cocek, I would like to introduce him shortly. Since 2023, has been working in different positions at the Ministry of Transport, at the State Fund of Transport Infrastructure. He has been also working at the railways in Czech railway infrastructure. And thank you very much. Was promised to get 15 minutes, and I hope I will stick to this time. I would like to present some figures to you, and also I would like to present the overall vision of what can be done to stand up to the promise to develop these lines, at least from the financial point of view. So the first thing perhaps is to put this into a context of the overall challenges that we face in relation to railway. When we discuss high-speed lines, we need to understand what we need to finance. The first the question is whether we will have enough funds to make the investment into building the high-speed rail lines. But this is not all. We also need to be able to subsequently maintain and operate these lines. So even after completion of the construction phase, the financial requirements will be relatively high. Another thing that should be kept in mind, although it does not relate directly to infrastructure, is that some trains will be running on these lines, and the operation of these trains will cost something. So this is all captured by the feasibility studies. It is verified that it makes economic sense, but these are some financial expenditures for which the government needs to be ready. And also, because the funds that we have available are limited, we need to make sure that we allocate these funds appropriately between operation and infrastructure maintenance and development. Also, we need to keep in mind that we have still enough funding for traditional rail lines for operating and maintaining these lines. We want to avoid a situation when we have a very well-functioning high-speed rail network, but we do not want to neglect the other parts of the railway network. So here we can see the basic financial indicators summarized. If we looked at the conventional network, then the revenues from the operation on conventional network consisting of excess charges amount to 3.5 billion crowns in a year. The costs of operating and maintaining are 30 billion crowns, and investments into the infrastructure. The realistic figure of the needed investments is in the order of tens of billion crowns a year. If we looked at the high-speed rail, then the revenues during the construction phase, that means within 25 years, will be approximately 90 billion crowns. The costs of operation and maintenance for the same period, 220 billion crowns, and the investment itself, more than 800 billion crowns. If I look at this in the context of what has been invested by the Czech Republic in the development of transport infrastructure since 2001, we can see this figure. In the previous slide, I used prices in 2020. Here we are using current prices. And if we looked at this graph over this period, 372 billion crowns were invested into railways. That means it is less than we need into the investment in high-speed rail itself. If we looked at road infrastructure, it is approximately 800 billion Czech crowns, which roughly corresponds to what is needed to be invested into development of high-speed rail. So we need to have more financing options. So we looked at what options are available. The first logical option is to use national resources. This will always be the main pillar because the infrastructure brings economic benefits for the state, so the state bears the costs. Another options are other public funding, which means mainly EU funding, and in this context, this is mainly funding from the connecting facility instrument as the key subsidy tool for developing trans-European network. Another source that is available are loans from institutional banks such as European Investment Bank, but it can also be National Development Bank and similar types of institutions. Then another option is the already mentioned PPP model or some form of a concession model. And also another option are bond programs. I mentioned them here separately, but they can also be included in the first item as the national resource, national funding. Also, when we have PPP project, the single-purpose vehicles can be financed through green bonds. So what can we do at this moment to be ready? The first thing is for PPP project is not to implement first PPP projects in developing high-speed rail, and rather try on something that we already have experience with. So for this reason, government commissioned the two feasibility studies for the development of traditional rail network, traditional rail infrastructure, and the purpose for this is to get experience, get know-how about how rail PPP projects should be done. And we already see now from the feasibility studies that this is something slightly different than developing motorways. I'm happy that I don't see anyone except from Lenka Hlubočková that are responsible for motorways here, and this was just a joke. But in motorways, the technology is much easier. You have just put asphalt on the surface and you are done. if I exaggerate this a little bit. Tomas, please be more careful in this intermodal comparison. Okay, so I wanted to mention that when we are discussing railways, we need to take care of much more technology such as communication, security devices, safety devices, and we need to make sure that the sharing of risk and transfer of risk within the projects for individual activities makes sense. I cannot, for instance, have some safety and security interlocking technology installed by one provider on just one part of the section. So it has its specifics, and we need to learn how to take them into account. What is also important is creation of the appropriate system for green bonds. I do not expect that the rail infrastructure, Czech infrastructure manager would become issuer of green bonds. So this is not possible. But what we can do is we can prepare internal reporting system and rules for project preparation to make sure that when Ministry of Department comes to us and says that they decided in collaboration with Ministry of Finance that these projects will be covered by issuance of green bonds, then we will be ready to provide sufficient amount of information on projects and have a reporting system available that will make sure that the green bonds can be used.
Další věcí, už to tady bylo.
Next thing, and we've already heard about that, is to prepare projects for European funding, either from the existing sources or for future perspectives. Also, when dealing with the European Commission, we should cooperate with the European Commission in setting the right need for funding of high-speed rail lines. The last important step is to start cooperating with banks such as the European Investment Bank. Now to those PPP models. I can see that time flies. So now we have prepared studies for 2 PPP projects. We created an instrument in cooperation with the European Investment Bank. We've reviewed several projects. We chose connection between Prague and airport, Prague-Veleslavín and Ruzyně airport. But there are also other interesting projects that could be solved through a PPP project, such as the installation of ETSC. Abroad, they use PPP for this purpose. We also plan to develop a Tachlovický tunnel. Tunnels are something that is very often covered by PPP projects in foreign countries too. So we've got 2 prepared or completed feasibility studies. We provided the results to the Ministry of Transport. We are awaiting their decisions. Nemanice-Všivětín is section number 1. Capex is around 11 billion Czech crowns. Construction project could start due to tendering related to PPP projects in around 2026. The second project is bigger. It's upgrading of line between Prague and the airport. There are several alternatives of this project. Capex is 18 to 20 billion Czech crowns. What we expect from these projects? We expect being prepared, being able to prepare feasibility studies and being able to go through the whole process for high-speed rail lines too. We would like to start reviewing one project in Moravia. It's a project related to Moravská Brána 1 and 2 and high-speed rail in South Moravia, and there are some sections that could be included, such as the section between Brno and Přerov. which will include upgrading of conventional line. Well, PPP as such will not suffice. We've reviewed also other funding models used abroad. We got inspired by Austria and Germany because their legal framework, their legal environment is relatively similar to that in the Czech Republic. We share similar history and similar types of networks. There's one solution that could be used, and that's something that we call state concessioner. The government asks a public entity to build, to operate, while providing payments or fees. The direct debt is not a debt of the government. There is just the obligation to provide payments. There are qualitative terms. If the state concessioner or public concessioner does not comply with the conditions, the payment can be reduced. In Austria, they use this system, and there's a 6-year plan defining what should be done and the quality of the service to be provided rather than the infrastructure. And there are also some sanction mechanisms set. The process is slightly different from that in the Czech Republic, where funding of repairs and maintenance is based on a subsidy model. So this is all from me. To conclude, I'd like to say that the most important thing that can be done at this very moment to be able to develop those projects and fund those projects is to have faith. I don't know whether Martin Janeček is somewhere in the room. He's an employee of the Ministry of Transport. He managed to launch the first PPP project in 2021. He had that thick file at his desk and he kept convincing people about the purpose of the project. He was ready. We have Deputy Chairman Havlíček, Lenka Hlubočková, and as soon as he could run the project, he did that. And I do apologize to those guys who engage in roads, but this particular project is very successful and I hope we'll be able to continue in the same way. Thank you. Thank you, Tomas Cocek. Let me now say the following. If you want to ignite a fire, you need to be burning. And I can see that my colleagues Lenka Hlubočková and her team and all their colleagues are truly passionate. There's lots of passion and they really managed to succeed. The road project on D4 was really a huge impetus for the House of Deputies. We know that there are lots of obstructions in the Czech House of Deputies, but whenever a PPP project arises, we can find consent across political forum. So I do have faith, and I can see that any successful road project can open a gate for us who operate in the railway sector. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to remind you of the Slido option. You can use QR codes to pose questions. I can see that there are first questions available. You can also vote. You can like questions that you like most. We'll post them, so you can affect the questions that will be posed. Thank you. I'd like to introduce you to Mona Bercaud. Mona has been engaged in large private companies, infrastructural companies for 35 years. Since 1991 she's been with Vansi, and then in 2009 she started to engage in PPP projects and large international deals. Mona is now the head of international affairs of SNCF Réseau, the French national infrastructural manager, and I hope they'll help finalize the network, a large green infrastructural network in Europe. I truly appreciate that she's willing to be here with us.
I'm the head of the international affairs in SNCF, and it's not on the right way. So just a few words to say who is SNCF. SNCF is a railway French national group, and you can see on these slides that SNCF Réseau is the infrastructure manager of this group. So a few figures, just on the French network, we have 2,737 kilometers of high-speed rails. You can see that 2,100 is operated by SNCF Réseau, and we have 600 kilometers that are operated by other infrastructure managers, which are essentially PPPs. The high-speed is about 300 or 320 kilometers, depending on signaling. And we have numbers before COVID, which were 99 billion of passengers per kilometer. So the lines in service, we have over 10 lines in service right now. The first one was the one from Paris to south of France in 1981. So that's already 40 years that we're operating high-speed lines, and not even that we have so many, but we are planning to build some more. So we have a few projects in our files, like GPSO or LNMP, which are in fact acronyms to continue the lines to the south, and the Spanish corridor also. So, sorry. The question was, what are the benefits and the challenges of high speed? So you see, Jiri, we are playing also with card in France. So you've seen Czech Republic when you will have all your high-speed network in service. So this is today in France. The geography is quite changed because of time savings. And this is quite an interesting benefit of high speed, I would say, because nowadays with COVID and everything, everybody is changing his mind about his way of living, his way of working, and most people are going out of big cities. And this is also something that is happening grace to the high-speed rails, because the time of transport is really now ready, that you can be on very far from a big city and work and come every day to your work by high-speed train. What changes also is the territory. Here is a map of a PPP, which is the Montpellier station, south of France, and you see before and after. And it's really something that is to be dealt with the territory, with the local authorities. It's not the infrastructure manager alone. It's the whole region, the whole territory that is working on developing the territory. So there is another benefit that is not very often named, which is that when you're having a high-speed line constructed, there's a huge impact on jobs and on skills. These will be also, these are numbers from SEA, which is a Tours Bordeaux high-speed line, but my colleague from Patrick Levers will give you also the figures from BPL, Brittany, Pays de la Loire. And so what you can see here, for example, is the region of Aquitaine, which is a very deprived region in terms of unemployment. And you see how much the jobs raised and how much there were a lot of benefits in terms of employment, of tourism also, because of the high speed coming to that territories. I'm going too fast.
Další přínos vysokorychlostních tratí je vliv na cenu pozemku. Samozřejmě to závisí na tom, z jaké strany se na to díváte. Tady vidíme nějaké číselné údaje, které také pocházejí z té SEA. Vidíte, že došlo k výstavbě mnoha bytů, kanceláří, obchodů, celkově k urbanistickému rozvoji těch okolních oblastí. A také bych se chtěla zaměřit na takzvanou elasticitu poptávky. Tady vidíme prognózu poptávky, na kterou se také musíme zaměřovat. Tady používám jeden příklad, což je trať spojující Paříž s Lyonem, a toto jsou údaje z roku 82, kde byla ta trať otevřena. V roce 81 vlastně ta trať končila těsně před Lyonem a potom byla prodloužena až přímo do Lyonu a celkově bylo na tomto spojení přeplaveno 7 milionů cestujících a tady na tom grafu vidíte, jak vzrostla ta přeprava od roku 82 z těch 7,2 milionů přepravených osob na více než 44 milionů v roce 2017, což je skutečně impresivní číslo. A potom existuje jeden příhoda, jedna výhoda, které jsou si všichni vědomi. Vlaky, železniční přeprava produkuje mnohem menší množství emisí oxidu uhličitého. Tak. A ještě bych měla říci něco Tomášovi. Díky nové metodologii dokážeme nyní skutečně objektivně posoudit, jakým způsobem, jak vysoké jsou ty emise CO2 a v současné době je produkován, vlastně je díky železniční dopravě se vysokorychlostním tratím se nevyprodukuje 10,9 milionů CO2 ročně, což je vysoké číslo a se s bojem proti změně klimatu samozřejmě souvisí přechod na jiné typy dopravy, ale mění se podmínky i v jiných způsobech dopravy, takže uvidíme, jak se bude situace vyvíjet. Tady jsou údaje o nákladech na výstavbu a provozování 1 kilometru tratě. Samozřejmě ta cena závisí také na tom, jaké jsou geografické podmínky. Čím více musíte stavět, tak tím je to samozřejmě nákladnější. Ty údaje zase v současné době nebudou 20, ale spíše 30 milionů euro na kilometr, protože došlo k inflaci například na tom spojení Lyon Tour jsou ty náklady mnohem vyšší, dosahují 150 milionů na kilometr, ale je to kvůli tomu, že ten terén je náročný, je hornatý a je nutné budovat mnoho mostů a tunelů. Tady na tom obrázku vidíte, jak se měnilo financování původně vlastně jsme SNCF zahrnovala správci infrastruktury i provozovatele dopravy, potom došlo k oddělení, to mělo tedy dopady na to financování vlastně výstavby následujících fází, výstavby dalších tratí. V těch pozdějších projektech jsme zapojili do financování také místní úřady a někdy také přispěla k tomu financování ta země, se kterou ten nově budovaný úsek trati nás spojoval. Takže tak to vypadalo financování. A můj poslední slide vlastně je takovým úvodem do toho, k čemu vám více řekne můj kolega. A tady vidíme, jakým způsobem, že máme ve Francii, používáme v zásadě dva druhy PPP projektu. Za prvé je to koncese, kde vlastně získává příjmy ten provozovatel z toho, co vybere na jízdném, a potom druhý typ je založený na partnerství. A my se ještě zmíníme o rozdílech mezi těchto dvou typech přístupů a v souvislosti vlastně s plánováním vašich projektů. Samozřejmě vždycky tam jsou také veřejné finance, tyto investice vždycky zahrnují nějaké dotazy, ale je důležité také zaměřit se, jakým způsobem jsou ošetřena rizika v rámci jednotlivých modelů, a o tom se také zmíníme podrobněji. Je to důležité především v případě například koncese, v případě toho projektu SEA, o kterém jsem hovořila, tak pokud nastane situace, jako je třeba nastala v souvislosti s covidem, tak v tom případě je pro správce infrastruktury výhodné mít soukromého partnera, který nese to riziko poptávky. A samozřejmě je důležité, jakým způsobem formulujete ten svůj kontrakt. Ve Francii v současné době stále ještě vlastně máme monopol vlastně na provoz železniční přepravy. Máme jednoho provozovatele železniční přípravy, takže v tom případě je nutné vlastně to správným způsobem ošetřit i v tom kontraktu, který uzavíráte. A potom v souvislosti s PPP projekty je v kontraktu důležité přesně definovat kritéria a poplatky za dostupnost, protože se tak vyvarujete nepříjemným překvapením na konci, když se potom setkáte s realitou. Klasickým případem je, kdy všechna rizika, všechno financování nese ten veřejný partner, tak to jsou projekty, které jsou vlastně veřejné. Abych to tedy shrnula, co přinášejí vysokorychlostní tratě? Jsou přínosné pro klima, přinášejí spokojenost zákazníků, také umožňují rozvoj území, kterým procházejí, a přispívají ke zvýšení zaměstnanosti a kvalifikace lidí v těch daných regionech, což je taky velice důležité, a to je také přínos těch vysokorychlostních tratí. Děkuji vám za pozornost. I would like to continue on Mona's presentation. She mentioned that the slide with construction costs, and it showed that in past the construction costs were between 15 and 20 million euro per kilometer. And regarding the green financing, yesterday we had a discussion evening for our members and invited experts from abroad when we discussed financing green bonds. And there was one question regarding to that. SNCF is the third biggest issuer of green bonds in Europe and sixth biggest issuer in the world. They would like to have all financing in short term in line with green financing rules. So this is an important aspect for them. And there is a question directed to Tomas Cocek that will be answered later. I would now like to invite another panelist, Andrew McNaughton. And I would like to say a few words to introduce Andrew McNaughton. Many of you will probably remember him. He is the chairman of a state-owned company that acts as infrastructure manager, HS1. He is also a professor at Southampton University and an expert advisor to the British government on large projects. And he also worked as an advisor to not only Australian but also Czech government on development of high-speed rail in Great Britain. He was one of the one of the chief engineers responsible for British railway network. And 6 years ago, he was one of the most important people who helped us to get ready and start the preparation of high-speed rail network in the Czech Republic. So I think that all his activities deserve applaud.
After that, this will be a very disappointing speech, I think. When I go around the world, everyone wants to talk about how fabulous high-speed rail is. How fast, how clean, how modern. Some of you are old enough to remember a lovely American rock star called Shania Twain. Shania Twain saying, "That don't impress me much." When you talk about big infrastructure, you have to focus on risk, positive and negative. And for this few minutes, I guess I'm going to focus on the relentless need to consider where are the benefits, how do you capture them, and how do you monetize them. In another place, we can talk about all the risks of actually construction, financing, everything else. But this is about focus on the benefits. And I use the example, I suppose, where we in Britain started to understand this. I'm not going to pretend we went out and achieved this through some grand plan. These happened to us and we learned from it. And that is the construction and operation of High Speed 1, which was conceived as a way of connecting Europe with Britain. Or if you're in Europe, connecting that funny little island with the rest of the continent. But its benefit is not really that. Its benefit is an economic and social benefit of connecting the cities and towns and communities in the east, far southeast of our country, back to our capital city. You'll see there on the right-hand side of that map, places like Margate, Ramsgate, Canterbury. Some of these are historic places, but what they had in common before High Speed 1 was that they were dying economically and socially. Agricultural areas, mining areas, steeped in the past, with young people leaving for better jobs elsewhere and never returning. Getting the whole area getting left behind because it was just too far and not connected from the rest of the country. 20 years on, it's completely different. Those cities and towns are thriving. First of all, the young people realised they didn't need to leave their homes and their friends to go and live in some garret in the city to get a good job. They could get a good job and still stay in their communities. Then people in the big city realised that these are actually fabulous places to live, and they could continue their work by bringing jobs, bringing their companies to these areas. So this is not particularly about who travels on the train, but the effect of the train on the communities. Yes, we see loads and loads of tourists, but for every job that was created, every economic job that was created as a consequence of High Speed 1, we've seen another 1 or 2 jobs in those employments that support all sorts of jobs, from restaurants, shops, retail, but also doctors, teachers, because there's more children there. These communities are now some of the best communities in the country. Land prices have almost doubled, but it's a thriving area. It would not have happened without High Speed 1. And when we look at the rest of our country, those places are still struggling, but this part of Britain has changed forever. The cost of that railway was around €6 billion. The passengers more or less pay the operation costs, but the economic benefit, the wider economic benefit in jobs and all the things that go with jobs, has been assessed in the first 10 years of operation as €6 billion. That railway line has paid for itself in wider economic benefits. But we never used to capture that. We just talked about ridership and fares. So you see on the screen now that we now understand there are 5 levels of benefit, and that if we're going to make a return on the investment of a huge piece of infrastructure, we have to focus relentlessly on getting the value out of those benefits. Not building stuff because it's nice to have, building stuff because it has an impact, and that impact can be monetized. So yes, there is the benefit to the traveller in journey time saved. The number of passengers has doubled, more than doubled. I think that's pretty normal when you have something like this. It has decongested our other transport, our motorways and our existing railways, so they too can accept new economic growth because there's room. So that's the second benefit. But then we come to those benefits which have not ever been really part of a transport case. Those benefits of the growing development around stations and the growing development in the whole city region. So this is now regional development. That can only be achieved through understanding, working in cooperation with city and regional leaders, them changing their regional plans, them understanding the opportunities that this new infrastructure brings to their city, their people, their children, their grandchildren. And then there is the benefit of carbon and energy, and I'm just going to run through these quickly. I just mentioned carbon because only recently have we really started to put money on this, and we still don't put enough. Because yes, we know that high-speed railway is almost carbon neutral in operation, although, and you've seen some of the developments on highways, there are ways of reducing the carbon in construction that we're only just starting to touch on. But even outside the carbon debate, high-speed rail is more energy efficient. And however you produce that energy, it costs money to produce, it costs money to transmit, and there will never be enough of it in the future, and it will always be expensive. So a mode of transport which, if well used, just uses less energy per traveller has to be good, and there has to be a value in that. We took it into High Speed 2, and if you read about High Speed 2, we've got all sorts of issues with this programme at the moment, but they're issues about construction and construction inflation, and that's not really what I'm talking about this morning. That's for another time. Yes, it's about reducing journey times, partly, but that was never a big driver. Never the biggest driver. The biggest driver is the impact on cities. In a country quite typical in Europe, where a lot of prosperity in the capital city, and as you drift away from it, less and less. We looked at how you connected cities away from the capital. This is not all about connecting cities to the capital. It's about connecting cities to each other so that they benefit each other, so that you can build a career in moving around between cities, that the people who have businesses can cooperate, that people meet socially, all the things that people like to do as human beings, because they're close enough together. And this was the vision for part of our network, which was to bring each regional city within 30 minutes of each other, because then they basically behave as one city. What does that do? Well, it changes cities. This is Birmingham. I'd like to say it's the Brno of Britain, but Brno's quite a nice place. Birmingham has not developed really for 40 years. But since High Speed 2 has been planned, it's not open yet. Birmingham is transformed around the place where the city council decided they wanted a new station. Not necessarily as the best, most perfect transport solution, but the best economic social solution. And in the centre around there, very much like you can see in Lyon in France, a post-industrial area of nothing much in particular except for vandalism, is being transformed into a whole new city quarter, not just for financiers and venture capitalists and people who do PPP, a mixed area of creative industry, of modern manufacturing industry. It doesn't have to be just about steel and glass skyscrapers. We're creating a whole new community. The station is expensive. It's costing us around 200 to 300 million euro. But the benefit of that station is seen an order of magnitude greater because it is changing the face of Birmingham. 5 years before we run the first high-speed train, there are over 30 tower cranes building the new city. Even more around the outskirts of London. This is the future of London. Doesn't look like it, does it? But this is the plan on the day that High Speed 2 opens. We're not just talking about a few jobs, we're talking about thousands of jobs. Not just a few houses and homes, but thousands of them. None of this was going to happen without high-speed rail. And it is understanding how much benefit there is, how you can then bring in the private sector to create that benefit, because it is real, it's not speculative, it's not a wish, it's not a hope. This will happen. So we can make high-speed rail not only fabulous, like everyone wants, but we can make it affordable, financeable, fundable by focusing on the benefits, realizing how we can contract to get those benefits delivered at a fair price, and with those people doing it, getting a fair part of the benefits monetarily that will come from that work. Thank you.
Andrew, thank you very, very much. Please, should you sit down. A pustíme se tedy, přátelé, do té debaty.
Let's start our debate, ladies and gentlemen. We've got some 30 minutes. I see that you got used to Slido. As I have said, you can also like the questions and you will move them upwards to increase their priority. Let me start with the first question. Tomas, it is for you and it's from me. Thank you for liking it. No, seriously, this is a key thing also for us here at the House of Deputies. Once we start promoting the project across political parties, we have already heard that we at the Railway Administration would like to use PPP projects for the first two stages of Moravská Brána. There is a deadline, 25-26, to launch the projects. I don't know, it may be delayed by 2 to 3 months. It doesn't matter, but truly we will need to get a decision by the Ministry of Transport. So what do you think? How would you comment on this timeline? How it should look like? Good question. Which decision are we talking about? Decision to develop or decision that a PPP project should be in place? The PPP project decision. Well, one thing is to decide to review the project. The other thing is to approve it for construction. To be realistic, the review of a PPP project and a related decision must be done within a very short period of time, let's say within a few weeks. Then we'll start preparing a feasibility study. This is this feasibility study will be based on some existing studies that are already available to us. And as soon as this feasibility study is done, we'll make the final decision whether we will proceed or not. The first parts or the first projects in terms of feasibility studies took us approximately 4 months. The process of assignment also takes a while in public administration, but most likely within 6 months, 9 months, I don't want to be extremely optimistic, we might have enough output to be able to make the decision whether we will proceed with the project or not. Next question, the topic of green bonds that was mentioned also by Mona and Tomas. Tomas, you mentioned green bonds as a form of funding. How realistic would that option be in the Czech Republic? What should be done to make this possible, even in the Czech Republic? I would divide it into 2 parts. What needs to be done with the Railway Administration Authority, and then what needs to be done by the issuer. First thing, it should be proved, and it seems like it is true, that green bonds or issuance of green bonds are more beneficial as compared to standard bonds. Based on all information we have, they should be more beneficial and their importance should further increase. So that's a piece of information for the entity issuing the green bonds. We should be able to prove that our projects, both at the stage of preparation and follow-up operation, comply with certain terms, and that we are able to report on the projects in a required form. So our task is to set our internal system to be able to link specific projects with a specific green bond issue. We, as an organization, cannot be, and it would not make financial sense, we cannot be a partner of the entity that will issue the bonds. It can be either the Ministry of Finance or the National Development Bank. It's up to a decision of the government. But we must be able to provide documents for them to see that it's worth issuing the bonds.
Thank you. I have one question for Mr. McNaughton, and that is, what are the biggest risks at the current stage of development of high-speed rails of which we should be aware?
I think the biggest risks are not technical. The biggest risks are that it is seen as a transport project and not a whole of country project. What do I mean by that? I mean, I talked about where are jobs going to be, where are people going to live, where are you going to invest in cultural and commercial activity, and what sort? And this needs the national and regional political and business leaders to be very mature and understand the opportunities for each place and be prepared to change their strategy plans, their zoning plans, in order that the development that is the real benefit of high-speed rail will take place. And in doing so, that will create more opportunities for PPPs around hospitals and schools and housing and all manner of things. Once, just as I explained with my Birmingham example, once the city takes ownership of its future, and a future which will be very different to its past. So it is about being whole of government, not just the Transport Ministry.
Andrew, vy hovoříte o politicích, myslíme...
Andrew, you are talking about policy makers. Are we talking about the national government or also about the regional governments that should make sure that they are able to use these benefits?
It's a national project. It's a national project. It has to have national leadership. But it has to be grabbed regionally, because it's the region that will benefit. Each region will benefit. And if we have places in Britain where the region doesn't really want to change, and you go, right, there's no point building this thing then. But the places that do will change, and they are the ones going, I want it sooner. I want it now. I want a future for my people. And you've got to work as a national politicians with those people.
Děkujeme, pojďme do slajda.
Thank you. Let's now continue with questions on Slido. There is a question, I'm not sure whether to Tomas or Jiri Merta. Would it be possible to say in more detail which part of Prague airport Prague Letiště Kladno rail link is being considered for implementation as a PPP? Will it be the Veleslavin Letiště section, which is the most needed at the moment? We are working with a model that it should truly be the section between Veleslavin and the airport, although this section consists of 3 construction sections. So brief answer is yes. Another question, the public sector refers to D4 as a very successful project so far. Would it be possible to indicate whether an inflation clause has been negotiated for the D4 project? Well, I'm not sure who should answer that, but maybe the people from Viasalis could answer that. Maybe Christian would be able to answer this question once again. The question is whether for D4 project there is a clause, inflation clause included in the contract.
Inflation clause included in the contract. So we bear the risk of price escalation. Of course, this now needs to be seen in the light of very high inflation rates going beyond 10% today. But as it stands, it is absorbed by the contracts.
Tak. Děkuju, nevím, jestli mám do češtiny.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether I need to translate into Czech or whether you listen to the interpreters. There is no inflation clause included, to sum it up. It was mentioned several times in connection with PPP. What we saw last year, the inflation that we witnessed last year, made this topic very highly discussed at the Ministry of Department, because we need to focus on inflation clauses, etc. But in the case of D4, the situation is different. In November 2024, the availability payment by the state will initiate, and all the risks are borne by the concessionaire. So, Martin, I would like to comment on this. This is indeed true. On the other hand, with what we witnessed in the past years and with the inflation rates going high, we can expect in the future some sharing of risk, inflation risk during the construction phase. I think in the next contracts, this clause will need to be included, because these risks are really high. If the inflation can reach tens of %, then we cannot expect the contractor to bear this risk. If they were to bear this risk, then there will be a high risk surcharge, and we do not want that for the future project. So thank you. Another question, again regarding the high-speed rails. For which specific sections of the high-speed rail would it be appropriate to use PPP? We already mentioned the line going through the Moravian Gate, and I am a politician from Pardubice, from Eastern Bohemia, so I always promoted that the line should be first built in the Elbe River region, in my region. So I will perhaps modify this question. Could you imagine that all pilot sections we are considering would be starting using PPP model? Well, we can imagine a lot of things, but what is important here is to consider the capacity of the existing market. And I would like to say one thing that is important. It might seem that we like funds and therefore we choose PPP approach, but this is not correct. PPP should be about benefits it provides. It provides some added value provided by the concessionaire, and already when we selected conventional projects, we considered not only whether we have or do not have funding, but we considered whether for the specific section there is a room for the concessionaire to come up with some improvements, to bring some added value, because looking at PPP only as a form of loan, it would make this loan extremely expensive. So for every project, we need to look at whether there is room for the concessionaire to bring some added value, whether there is some potential where the private sector can help to further improve the project and make it more efficient. And this is what the feasibility study should focus on. This is at the moment, we are working on the feasibility study for the Moravian Gate, but of course we can do feasibility studies on another lines. We have another question for Mona. I would like, and this relates to what Andrew McNaughton mentioned. What is the involvement of regions in financing of high-speed rail in France? To what level regions participate in funding of development of high-speed rail in France?
Depending on the regions, but you've seen on the map that it's a really huge part of the financing, because we have almost half of the financing sometimes that is on the burden of the region. Am I too short? Are you waiting for some more details?
Well, we sometimes hear in various debates that high-speed rail damaged the regions because they help to drain people outside from the region. And these are usually comments that we hear here. We do not know how it works in France, or these are comments from the people who do not know how it works in France.
In France, because as Andrew, I mean, we didn't share our presentations, and in fact we said exactly the same thing. I'm not speaking as well as Andrew, of course, but the spirit and the intent was exactly the same. And I think that what Andrew said for England is really the same in France. The territories are very happy when this opportunity is given to them, as you say, Andrew, to take their future into their hands and to develop around the stations, the high speed, and everything that goes with that.
Za tu reakci děkuji a já se teď
Thank you for this response, and I would like to ask Mr. Merta. You now go around the region, you visit Kutná Hora, Terezín, and you meet strong resistance. This is the not in my backyard syndrome. So what arguments do you use when you take part in these public discussions? How do you explain the benefits to the people region? Or maybe you could also describe what the opponents say. What are their arguments? Well, what the opponents say is what they said 170 years ago, that they don't want the line there. This is quite simple, that it is not for them, that they do not need to travel to Prague, or they can reach Prague in 30 minutes by car. So the arguments are exactly the same as what we heard in the past. We try to explain to them that there are benefits for the region, there are benefits for the community, for the society, and we would also like to prepare calculation of wider economic benefits and to present them these to them. As Andrew mentioned, we would like to show that these lines can contribute to the economic development, to the employment levels, etc. So now I will follow up with another question which is linked to this, and I think that we should all consider this question. And I will ask this question, I will direct it also to Andrew and Mona. Is there any consideration being given to encouraging local economy involvement in HSR, particularly for trains, similar to offsets for defense energy projects? So I think that here, if a government plans a big project like a nuclear facility, and if it says in the conditions that it wants participation of Czech companies in the project. So maybe here the question is whether when we develop these sections we could put some conditions that we want also regional companies to participate in the project. For me, as a politician, regional politician, this is an interesting and compelling idea, but I cannot imagine how we could put it in practice. Tomas, can you think about something, and then I will ask Andrew and Mona about whether they have some ideas about how to get involved local companies from the region in the construction. Well, I think it doesn't really matter whether we are speaking about high-speed rail, motorways, or any other public project. Yes, as part of the tendering procedure, we can use one of the assessment as one of the assessment criteria, some form of participation of regional companies, of the contractor on the local market. They should, for instance, allow study stays for students, and the participation can have various forms. But this criterion cannot be a decisive criterion. So if I want to talk about the main construction phase, then the involvement of smaller regional companies probably will not be high. But this links also to the previous question about the benefits for the region. This development provides opportunities to the region, and it is up to the region how they use these opportunities. If they use them well and use them to contribute to the development of the region, then automatically it contributes also to the development of regional companies. Thank you. I would like to ask Andrew for his opinion on this, on experience, and then I will also like to hear the experience from France.
We learnt from visiting in the construction phase the Tour Bordeaux PPP, which I think Vinci was involved with, that not so much. We decided that it was difficult to say you had to employ a local company, but we could write in to the contracts your commitment to train people and create jobs, and not just the job of being the security attendant on the compound, not just the very unskilled jobs, if you like. But you would, if you wanted to be part of our program, you had to commit to an apprentice scheme for all sorts of skilled jobs in construction, and then potentially in the future operation. And that made a big difference to the way the project was seen in some of the parts of the country, because not everybody's going to have a station. Not everybody's going to be the new centre, but to say, doesn't matter, at the moment there are no jobs in your area, but other than warehouse attendant or agricultural worker, we will bring in companies who will only get the job if they're committed to a percentage of local people in skilled employment. And we decided we could do that. Of course, as Tomas has said, it's not the only criterion, but actually it's making a much more value-based tendering process.
Yes, thank you, Andrew, for saying this example. That's true. That's one like this, yeah, is one thing to have it in your contract, but what we're doing, as Andrew said very early in a previous question, one thing that is very important in France is concertation, public consultation, because what we are doing is the project is not starting the time you are starting construction. I mean, the project is starting very far in advance before. And what is very important is this phase where you have the discussion with all the people that will be impacted, either because they will have a station, as you say, or maybe because they are not that far and they will also benefit from the project, and to hear what are the attempts of the people, the riverside people, etc., is really a phase that you have to put in place very carefully and very actively. Then, of course, it's very important, as Andrew said, to have incentives for the private partner. But I think it's not a game alone. It's a game with the regions, with everybody. Everybody needs to be on the board if you want to success on that, because you cannot do that only on one side. You have to do it with everybody. And what is also important for us is the numbers we've seen. Usually there are numbers that are during the construction period, because of course there's obvious that a lot of jobs are arising at that time. But what is important, and I think my colleague Patrick will talk about that too, is to stay after. I mean, the time of construction is not the time of a project like a high-speed project, because it's a long-term project, and you have to be there also after, and to make sure we're working with what is called Pôle emploi in French, which is the employment state institution that is dealing with unemployed people. And so there are usually some partnerships that are created with this kind of institution to make sure that everybody is on board, and on board for the long term. And if I may also say one other idea, is that in SNCF we have a subsidiary that is called SNCF Development, which is dedicated to that. In fact, in SNCF Development, the purpose of the company is to make sure that the territories, because we're everywhere, I mean, we're not, the headquarters, of course, are in Paris, sorry, but we're everywhere in the country. And so it's very important for us to make sure that whenever there is less trains in a region, or when there is a change like a new coming, to make sure that the territories are really taken into account and taken care of.
Tak ještě rychle dotaz na Andrew McNaughtona. My se zatím zaměřujeme na...
A quick question for Andrew. We've been discussing infrastructure, fast, speed, etc. But the resulting efficiency of this system has many aspects. What's the relationship between infrastructure and trains? Does infrastructure define trains, or do trains define infrastructure? I think we haven't discussed trains so far.
Very deep question, and a very important one, actually. It's not an infrastructure, it's a system. The system is obviously trains and people and infrastructure, and you have to conceive it and develop it as a total system. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm thinking. I can't think and shout at the same time. Sorry. It's a total system. That means that the specification is not just tendering so that the trains and the infrastructure turn up at the same time, although there have been examples of where that has failed miserably. It is specifying the train and the operational concept together with the infrastructure. A couple of quick examples. The definition you put in, or the specification, and how much you're prepared to pay for reliability of a train will define just how much infrastructure you need to put into the infrastructure piece to cope with failure. Because if the trains don't fail very much, you don't need a whole lot of infrastructure to cope with failure. If the operational system, that's people and processes, has a greater investment in it, then again, you may not need so much infrastructure. One of the examples I always give of one of my railways is traditionally the number of trains in a station needed 8 platforms. And they were going to be very expensive. And so we said, what does it take to provide 6 platforms? The answer was a different design of train with more doors, so that it didn't have to hang around the station for 4 minutes. So we've designed a system with 2 minutes. But that's only by joining up the operational process, which includes, just to be boring for a minute, how you get people standing in the right place on the platform to get on the train and not be all at the wrong end. And you might think that's a silly example, but it's a big one. How do you achieve a lower cost, more reliable solution with greater value is only by considering the operational process, the trains and the infrastructure holistically as a system. Very important, and I'm really pleased that someone asked that question.
Děkujeme, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew. Next question, quite interesting. Do we have enough competent people in the railway administration and at the ministry to handle so many PPP projects? Will you be able to manage them all? So, do we have enough staff? An opposition politician, so it's not fair for me to comment on that, but we can see that recently, also from the viewpoint of the board of directors, it's the Railway Administration Authority, represented by Tomas Cocek, who became 2 months ago the deputy director general for economics. So maybe I will ask Mr. Cocek about his team, but also Jiri Merta can tell us about his colleagues. How many colleagues does he have? Okay, let's start with a general response. Do we have enough competent people experienced in a railway PPP projects in the Czech Republic? No, we do not have enough people because we haven't done PPP projects in the railway sector so far. So the thing is, and that's something that we focus on during pilot projects, and that's why we're doing pilot projects on conventional railway lines. There are lots of highly skilled people who are able to operate and manage railway projects, but we need to expand their knowledge with aspects that are important for PPP projects. And it's not only funding, but also a different approach in terms of development. We use measured contracts. PPP is something completely different. It's more complex than design-build projects that we have some experience with. So both the Railway Administration Authority, project designers, contractors, we all should learn how to deal with PPP projects on railways. So we do not have enough experience at this very moment, but we hope that before we start the first high-speed rail project, we'll be able to gather enough experience from other projects. Our department was established in October last year. We have staff of 70 and we have 27 vacancies. We've had them for several months because it's quite an issue to hire people currently. As mentioned by Mr. Cocek, nobody has any experience with railway PPP projects, and experience is very difficult to transfer. So we do not have experience with operating a high-speed rail line. That's why we have advisors such as SNCF, and they've got 50 years of experience, and it's been a great cooperation. Yes, on behalf of the management board, I've never seen issues in terms of funding. I believe those people are well paid. There's no problem with wages or salaries or remuneration. So there is enough money to pay those people in a fair way. But I must confirm, yes, it's the labor market that poses the major limits. There are 3 more minutes. There is an interesting calculation. Why in the Czech Republic we plan? Why is the investment in high-speed rail planned to be 2 times higher in the Czech Republic than in France? In the Czech Republic, it's 1 billion Czech crowns per kilometer. In France, it's 20 million euro per kilometer. That is 0.48 billion Czech crowns per kilometer. You finance guys should explain that to us. I'm not speaking on behalf of the designers. I do not have enough experience in designing high-speed rail lines, but when preparing feasibility studies and when preparing a project, we will learn whether what we use and what we know today corresponds to the reality. One of the major benefits of high-speed rail lines, and Jirka may want to correct me, is that we follow or we comply with standards that do not have a long history of conventional rail.
So this creates much more opportunities for making price comparison with projects abroad, and I'm very curious about when we see the real prices from first real projects. It may happen that we'll reassess the project, maybe downwards or maybe even upwards. Don't say that, Tomas. We need to go down with the costs. We need to make them lower. So it's sharp 11:30. We need to stick to our schedule because we have another blocks that will also bring interesting presentations and information. So we do not have time to answer all questions that were put using Slido, but we may apply the same approach as on other events. We will distribute this question to the participants and ask them to answer them later. So once again, I would like to thank the panelists of the first block, Tomas, Cocek, Mona Bercaud and Professor Andrew McNaughton. Thank you very much. So please stay with us. Stay with us. We will have the next block will focus on financing. It is relatively short, and then we will have perhaps the most interesting part. We will hear presentations about 5 real projects and experience from this project. So stay with us, and thank you very much.